We're in part 3 of our study of end times prophecies, and we're going to take a closer look at a few of the chapters that are in the book of Ezekiel. We did a kind of an overview of the book of Ezekiel, and for me, and I hope it is for you, in this part of our study, I hope you find that it's interesting, because we're going to be able to see some of the current world, or the current nations of the world that's on the world stage today, in looking at these particular chapters. We've been studying a lot of things, specifically some of the things that will take place during the 7-year tribulation. We looked at why that period of 7 years has been established and set aside by God. We looked at that. In this study, we're going to zoom in just a little bit closer to events that are prophesied to take place before this time of tribulation. So you probably already know the next thing on the prophetic calendar is the rapture, or if you really want to get technical, the harpazo, which is a Greek word which means a sudden snatching away. And you see that used in Thessalonians specifically. But after that starts, there's a 7-year tribulation. And to take us in and kind of start to zoom in on Ezekiel a little bit, chapter 37, verses 1 through 14, Ezekiel has this vision of dry bones in a valley, okay? And God directed him to prophesy the rebirth of the nation of Israel in chapter 36. So God announces here, basically through this prophet, that Israel will be restored to her land. However, if you think about it, when this was actually prophesied, this probably seemed impossible in light of Israel's condition at the time. Israel was literally dead as a nation, okay? No longer the majority of them no longer in their land of Israel. And Israel had been divided and dispersed, so the idea of a unification or a restoration, it seemed impossible to them, okay? So God gave Ezekiel the vision of the dry bones as a sign. God gave Ezekiel this vision to a valley full of dry bones, and he directed him to speak to these bones. He was told to tell the bones that God would make breath enter them again and come to life, just as in the creation of Adam and in the book of Genesis, when he breathed life into Adam. And Ezekiel obeyed. The bones came together, flesh developed, skin covered the flesh, breath entered the bodies, and they stood up like a vast army. So this vision symbolized that the whole house of Israel, who was at the time in captivity, would be brought back together again as a nation. And you know, these people, you got to think about it for a minute. Try to put yourself into, when you're reading the scriptures, try to put yourself into the story, if you will. And, you know, this had to seem impossible to them, okay? The vision, most importantly, showed that Israel's new life depended on God's power and not the circumstances of the people at the time. Putting breath by God's Spirit into the bones showed that God would not only restore them physically, but spiritually. Do you realize, and this is my opinion, that prophecy was most likely fulfilled May 14th, 1948. That's when Israel became a nation in one day. Personally, I think that's a fulfillment of that prophecy. So that brings us to chapter 37. And you read these strange names like Gog and Magog. Historically speaking, Magog was a grandson of Noah. The descendants of Magog settled to the far north of Israel. Okay, and Magog seems to be used here to refer to the northern barbarians. So one thing about, just a quick note here, when you're looking at directions, north, south, east, or west in the Bible, put a pin right where the nation of Israel is, and then compass off of that, north, south, east, and west. That'll give you your geographical directions. The people of Magog are described as skilled warriors in chapter 38 and 39. And Gog and Magog appear in Ezekiel 38, 39, and also in Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 and 8. But although these two passages use the same names, a close study demonstrates that these do not refer to the exact same people and events. The events are separated by at least 1,000 years. In Ezekiel's prophecy, Gog will be the leader of a great army that attacks Israel, which is peaceful and unsuspecting at the time. To be a nation at peace means everything will look very differently than it does right now. Gog is described as of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. So when will Ezekiel's battle of Gog and Magog take place? There's a couple of different ideas. One is before the tribulation begins. This point of view, it points to the fact that the people of Israel will be burning weapons for 7 years and spend over 7 months burying the deceased. That's chapter 39, verses 9 through 10, and 12 and 16 if you want to look it up. And that length of time most likely requires a battle to be fought before the tribulation, and possibly even before the rapture of the church. During the first part of the 7-year tribulation, that's another viewpoint. And this one hinges on the fact that Israel will be at peace, okay, when the war begins. And the security that Israel enjoys is assumed to be a result of the covenant with what the Bible calls the Antichrist. And according to Ezekiel, Magog will not win this war. God will intervene. In Ezekiel 38, verse 19, it talks about a great earthquake. It says, every man's sword will be against his brother, in verse 21. And God will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on Gog and on his troops, and on the many nations with him, verse 22. So this seems to line up with the Battle of Armageddon, which is at the end of the 7-year tribulation. The result is the nations will see God's greatness and holiness. And Gog and Magog are mentioned again in Revelation 20, verses 7 and 8. The duplicated, if I can use that word, use of the names of Gog and Magog is to show that these people demonstrate the same type of rebellion against God and antagonism towards God and towards the nation of Israel. The book of Revelation uses Ezekiel's prophecy of Magog to portray a final end times attack on Israel. The result of that battle will be all are destroyed. Satan will find his final place in the lake of fire as the end of that battle comes about. But it's important here to recognize that Gog and Magog of Ezekiel 38 and 39 is quite a bit different from the ones we read about in Revelation chapter 20. And here are some of the more obvious reasons why these refer to different battles, okay? One, the battle of Ezekiel 38 and 39, the armies primarily come from the north and involve only a few nations of the earth. The battle in Revelation chapter 20 will involve all nations. So there's your key. And paying attention, when you're reading some of this stuff, just exactly what does it say? So the armies are going to come from all the directions, not just the north in that one. Number two, there's no mention of Satan in the context of Ezekiel 38 and 39. In Revelation 20, the context clearly places the battle at the end of the millennium with Satan as the primary adversary. It's possible, again, this is my opinion, that these two separate battles take place with some of the same nations, okay? Just my opinion there. Excuse me. In Ezekiel 39:11 through 12, it states that the dead will be buried for 7 months. There would be no need to bury the dead if the battle in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is the same one as described in Revelation 20, because immediately following the one in Revelation 20 is the great white throne judgment. And it says then in Revelation 21, verse 1, then the present heaven and earth are destroyed, replaced by a new heaven and earth. So There obviously will be a need to bury the deceased after the battle takes place, before or in the early part of the tribulation, for the land of Israel to be occupied for another 1,000 years, okay, which is the length of the millennial kingdom. The battle in Ezekiel is used by God to bring Israel back to Him. In Revelation, Israel has been faithful to God for 1,000 years. In other words, the millennial reign or the millennial kingdom. The ones in Revelation who are rebellious are destroyed without any more opportunity for repentance. That brings us to chapter 39. So in Hebrew literature, it was common to give an account and then to repeat it. There's a lot of that in the Bible. If you can ever get your mind wrapped around that concept of writing, it helps you to understand some things a little bit more. In chapter 39 and verses 1 through 8, it's a summary of what is described in Ezekiel chapter 38. The overthrow of Gog and his forces here is retold in different language, so to speak, and in more fuller detail. So, the words of Ezekiel 38 verses 1 and 2 are repeated. Gog speaks of a person or ruler, the prince. Rosh either describes one place where Gog rules or completes the phrase chief prince. Meshach and Tubal are other places under the domain of Gog. And so you got to think about it too. Ezekiel's describing warfare the way he knew it, okay? So it's talking about an archer, like a bow and arrow. So a skilled archer was very effective in battle, but not with the bow knocked out of his hand and his arrows on the ground. And Gog's military effort against Israel will fail. That's what that's depicting. And I'm going to kind of unpack a few of the sentences in some of these verses. So it says, "You shall fall upon the mountains of Israel." Gog, either himself personally or the army that is an extension of his power, will cease to be in Israel when they attack. Magog itself attacked, and God's name is glorified by this. If you read the last few chapters of Revelation, you'll see that's the end result. That's the absolute end result. It says, "I will send fire on Magog." So it's either talking about part of the battle or soon afterward, because God promised to send fire on Gog's land, which is Magog. There's a phrase, "and on those who live in security in the coastlands." It's talking about the ones that's going to be attacked. The same fire that came on Magog is also going to come against these coastlands. And the term doesn't refer to a distinct place, but to unspecified and distant coastlands or islands. Some people have tried to connect these coastlands to the United States and other nations, but there's no foundation for that. Okay, there's no foundation for it. The isles referred to are the coastlands and the islands of the Mediterranean. And the judgment on the enemies will occur in Israel. This will be a catastrophic event, okay, and this will extend way out past just there to the very ends of the earth. There's another statement, "So I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel." So God will use this victory over Gog and his allies to bring his people to a restored relationship and back to holiness. The result that I will not let them profane my holy name anymore. It means that though Israel has been gathered back into the land and lived in relative safety, a true relationship to Yahweh hadn't been restored up to that point. But that will happen after this last battle. The phrase "my holy name," the whole Gog, Magog, will demonstrate once and for all God's holiness on a global, worldwide scale. It's not as some sort of theological abstract, but in action, okay? As he stands to defend his people against evil. As it says, "Then the nations shall know that I am the Lord." The nations, more than one. Through this, God's going to reveal himself not only to Israel, but to the entire world who will be watching this. And it says, surely it is coming and it shall be done. God solemnly affirmed Ezekiel's prophecy. Okay? The victory over Gog will fulfill what God had spoken before in Ezekiel 38, verse 17. In the 9 and 10, what you find is this defeated Gog is plundered by Israel. Those who dwell in the cities of Israel will go out and set fire and burn the weapons. Israel's going to destroy this military equipment left behind by this fallen army that was brought by Gog and its allies for 7 years. So that speaks to the vast amount of military equipment that will be brought for this. They will plunder those who plundered them. What Gog and his allies intend for Israel is going to be turned and fall on them. Okay, that's what that's telling us. The plunderers will be plundered. What the enemy of Israel intends for Israel will be their demise. In verses 11 through 16, you read about this defeated army that's buried by Israel. It says, in that day I will give Gog a burial place there in Israel. So God promised to give a proper burial to the slain soldiers of Gog and his allies. And this could be regarded as a compassionate act, but it's to cleanse the land. Okay, that's what it's for. The unburied of the slain defile the land. A burial place, what it's talking about, is a mass burial. Okay, and it says it will obstruct travelers. The number of deceased will be so much it'll seem to fill this valley up. And it says in 17 through 20, verses 17 through 20, you get kind of this gross picture here. It says, speak to every sort of bird and to every beast of the field. This section is dealing directly with Gog and his allies. And it ends with this grotesque picture of wild birds and beasts scavenging. It says, gather together from all sides to my sacrificial meal. This is a powerful picture here, and it will be further developed. As it was customary to eat a ceremonial meal with an animal sacrifice, but in this one, God considered this meal for bird and beast to be a sacrificial meal. In Revelation, John linked this sacrificial feast, if you will, with the aftermath of the Battle of Armageddon. He also linked the invasion of Gog and Yahweh's defense, or God's defense of his people, to the battle at the end of Jesus' 1,000-year reign on earth. Because John links Ezekiel 38 and 39 to two chronologically separated events, it's likely that he uses Ezekiel 38 and 39 as examples of these yet future events rather than the events actually fulfilling the prophecy of 38 and 39 Ezekiel. The words my table here, we're still talking about this sacrificial feast, is mentioned in Ezekiel 39 and 19, is referred to as my table because it is the Lord who holds this feast. It's this vivid image here to bring out the idea of vast carnage. Okay? And the metaphor is drawn from what all of the Israelites knew at the time. Okay? Few of us have ever been to a slaughterhouse. We just haven't, or watched the ritual slaughter for sacrificial animals. I've never saw that. Okay? So it would be useless to use them as an illustration of blood pouring out everywhere. Okay? But every Israelite had watched these sacrifices taking place, so they absolutely got this. And it says, I will set my glory among the nations. This restoration is described in general in Ezekiel 34 through 39. Okay? And it was focused on Israel, but it was never limited to them. God's intention was to set his glory among the nations. He will do this through his judgment. And it says, the house of Israel shall know that I am the Lord their God from that day forward. This restoration brings Israel permanently into a relationship with God. This looks to be the ultimate restoration described by Paul in Romans 11 and 26. And he says all of Israel will be saved. And he says the Gentiles shall know that the house of Israel went into captivity for their iniquity. These nations will know that Israel's suffering was never because God was unable to help them. They will see that God was not a weak God or a mere local deity, if you will. They would know for a fact, they will know for a fact that God himself directed ancient Israel's suffering. And the calamity came upon on Israel, if you will, because of their sin, their national sin. And if you go back and read through about the first 1/3 of the book of Ezekiel, I can summarize it this way. It's going to show you all of the things that they were doing, which was sin against God. That's why they went into captivity. There's still this greater restoration that's going to take place. Israel was established as a nation in 1948. That's a fact. But there's another restoration coming. And you know, we shouldn't overlook the literal significance of this promise. All Israel, Paul tells us, includes the Gentiles. If you read up, you want to do an interesting just side study, sometimes look what Paul had to say about a true Jew. It wasn't somebody who was born that way. You're born again. Interesting study there, though. Go check it out. It says, left none of them captive any longer. So Israel's declaration here that not a single individual will be left behind when God restores his people. Okay? That's just what it means. It says, I shall have poured out my spirit on the house of Israel. So finally, Ezekiel 36 and 27, you get this powerful statement. But in the prophetic perfect tense, that I have poured out my spirit upon the house of Israel. Okay, is what it says. To put it into the future weakens the dramatic force of this. Okay, so as I mentioned early on in our study, there's, when you read through chapter 36, 37, 38, 39. So 37, you see the valley of the dry bones, Israel being restored as a nation and as a military power. And you get to chapter 37, and you start reading. It's pretty clear. You're reading names of nations. You're reading about a title of a leader in different nations. It's pretty clear about that. But who are these nations today? Countries, land masses have changed their names. So I'm gonna give you at least what I think they are. Back this up with some pretty good research, but here they go. So Rosh and Magog is Russia and its satellites. Meshech and Tubal, part of Russia, or possibly Turkey. Persia is absolutely Iran. They changed their name several times since they changed from Persia to Iran, but they changed from Persia to Iran in the 1930s. Cush, that is Sudan. Put, P-U-T, Libya. Gomer and Togomar, Turkey. Okay, so let's back up for just a minute and look at the nations that are mentioned in Ezekiel 38, just for a minute. So Gog is a person. We can clearly see that from the text. Magog is the land of Gog. In other words, where this person is from. He's also the leader of Tubal and Meshach. Some words have the word Rosh, R-O-S-H, in the list. Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, and Beth Togarmah are also found in the list of these different lands. And again, Magog is Russia, okay? Rosh is also a reference to Russia, what we know as Russia. Meshach is either Moscow or people north of the Black Sea. That's southern Russia. See if you recognize this one. That's the land we know of as Ukraine today. Tubal is always listed with Meshach in Scripture. This may be underlined, maybe Siberia or Central Turkey. Okay, according to Scripture, Russia has an alliance with several countries, and Persia is, again, it's absolutely the modern day Iran. So I want to bring something back up for a moment to show you something. Okay, this is just, I'll say God gave this to me several weeks back studying a lot of this stuff, but I'm going to take you, we've gone over all of this, so I think maybe we can show you how some of these players are here now. Okay, so if we go back to the book of Revelation, you guys have all heard the four horsemen. Okay, so let's take a look at that for a minute. The first one is a conqueror. He rides a white horse, which symbolizes conquest. This horseman carries a bow and is crowned. And a lot of people say that's Christ, but it's not. Okay, this is the Antichrist, which will be a political leader. How do I get that? He didn't have any arrows for the bow. It's symbolic. The crown says he rules. Okay, so the next horse that comes out is a red horse, and it brings war with it. The next one is a black horse. Famine comes with it. This horseman literally holds a pair of scales in his hand, which depicts famine. And the final horse is a pale horse. Depending on what translation you're looking at, it may say a greenish color. It's death, okay? It's clearly identified as death in Hades. So, not picking on nobody, but if you take those four colors and just pick any Islamic nation you would like to look at and look at their flags. Look at a lot of them, okay? Look at a lot of them. That is the four colors on that flag. Those four colors only. They're structured, shaped differently, but those four colors. There are other names that are mentioned, but are not in connection with the attack on Israel. Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish. Sheba and Dedan are areas of North Africa. Tarshish is most likely Spain or Britain. Those are the two that colonized South and North America. And the remainder of the book of Ezekiel deals with the rebuilding of the temple. But hopefully what you've been able to see tonight as you look a little deeper into the book of Ezekiel is when you see chapter 37, it's the vision of the valley of dry bones, okay? Personally, I think that prophecy was fulfilled in May of 1948 when Israel was reborn as a nation. So if that is so, then it takes us at least somewhere in the textual content of that book after that, okay? We're between there and this first battle of Gog and Magog. And I'm not even trying to predict. This could be 100 years from now for all I know. But prophetically, that's where we are. And I went back into Revelation for a moment to show you that and point out those four horsemen. And it could be coincidental. I don't know. But it's a fact that those four colors of those four horses are the four colors you see on those national flags. So this gives you a little bit more of an in-depth look into, we did I called it a 1,000-foot flyover of the book of Ezekiel. We just took you across the high points of it. But this takes us a little bit deeper. So let's think about what we've talked about over the last couple of weeks in our study of end times prophecy. We looked at the 7-year tribulation, some of the things that will take place during that period of time. We learned in that study that 7-year tribulation, you can start counting it on a calendar, so to speak, from the signing of a peace agreement between Israel and the Antichrist. The Antichrist will be a world political leader. Okay? We went and we looked and we studied why did God appoint that period of time, that 7 weeks. That 7 weeks comes out of the prophecy of the 70 weeks in the book of Daniel. We've talked about that on here before. I don't want to take you down that rabbit trail, kind of stay where we're at. And we're looking now, trying to see just a little more closely and define a little bit more, where are we now? Okay, where are we now on God's prophetic calendar? I study a lot, not to say that to brag, but I study a lot because this stuff is very important to me. It's very, very important to me, and I can't urge you enough. If and most of y'all, if not all of y'all that are on here with me live, are probably already born again Christians, but I don't know who's going to see this later. Okay, I cannot tell you it's enough. It's not about some sort of religion. It's about a relationship. Okay, we'll do a study. I'm studying, what actually takes place at the point of salvation and beyond, and we'll do a study on that once we get through the prophetic stuff. But think about this, ladies and gentlemen, and all of this sounds bad, and for those people who have to live through it, it's going to be the worst time it's ever been on this planet. But if you're born again, if you're saved by Jesus Christ, if you've placed your faith and your trust in Him, you're not going to be here for this, okay? Out of here. And which I'm going to kind of stop our study there because I'm going to pick up right there next week. We're going to take a look at the Apostle Paul and what he had to say to the church at Thessalonica. It's the book of Thessalonians. But we're going to take a look at that. So I hope you guys... I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've learned something. I hope that you're able to grow. The whole reason for this is chances are most of the people, if not all that see this, are believers. And it's to edify you, it's to encourage you, it's to hopefully make you want to read and study your Bible a little bit more. Maybe as we pull some things out, maybe you didn't know. That being said, I say this a lot to you guys, and I mean it. If there's something that you would like to study, reach out to me. I'm not going to tell you I know the answer to it, but we'll find it together. I promise you that. We'll find those answers together if you've got questions that come from the Bible. So, is there anything that I can answer for you guys tonight? Anything? Any questions? I see I got my cousin Donna's on here. Rose Harrison is watching. Maurice, I know Maurice there. And I probably missed some other names that came up in the chat, but welcome. You guys I'm so glad you're here. You're welcome.